but interesting events.
Yeah.
And we're a little bit a year removed from the settlement, National Association of Realtors, famous Stitzer Burnett case, if you will. Unbelievable, almost unfathomable judgment amount of over $1 billion, which pretty much homeowners won't see even $3 a piece out of that. But
It's still being
who's
disputed.
getting that money?
I don't know that anybody's going to get any money aside from the attorneys who began this whole debacle, in
Right.
my opinion.
Yep.
But really, that's still up for grabs. You know,
Yeah.
how much money and whose money? We know how much is being paid out, but but it's still being contested in the courts. So.
Yeah, it's interesting because I've been asked, I'm sure you have too, as to why NAR didn't appeal, didn't file an appeal.
Okay, so here's my take, and this is really a guess, but is my sound good here? Because I don't know,
You sound good to me.
Here's the speaker. um, when I was the DB for a large company, um, there were times when uh, we got close to some kind of lawsuit or another.
Mhm.
Um, Luckily, I was pretty much able to get those right off the table. But I learned a lot about E&O coverage and how that works. And I of course I had pretty close conversations with a lot of attorneys during that period of time. And the cost of litigation it's big. And so there's a cost benefit that goes on, and people, and companies especially take a look at that and they go, it's a roll of the dice. Let's just settle, and be done with it.
Mhm.
So, you know,
Well, from a legal standpoint, I'm under the impression, anybody in the legal world can correct me if wrong here. Uh, NAR didn't have a choice. They could not file an appeal. They didn't have the funds because the amount was so egregious. They didn't have the money to put up for the surety bond.
right. So, I mean, that's
It-
part
it-
of the
when
calculus.
the judge laid down that amount, they basically laid down that it was beyond the ability to appeal at that point, which is pretty sad. Um, because as you and I stated, I do think it was a mistake. I do think it was an overreach in many regards. And has it necessarily changed has it changed our industry? Of course it has. Has it changed things better for the consumer? And if that was supposedly the intent, I don't know that it's made anything better for the consumer, quite frankly.
I mean, that's hard to say. I would say when I look back, because we are over a year from the time when at least a company that I was a part of, where the settlement happened for those people. Because the settlement, people may not know it, but different companies settled at different times. So over the period of almost, 8 months, there are various different, plaintiffs that were a part of the lawsuit that defendants that would say, okay, well, we give up and we're going to toss ours money in the hat. And that began taking place around November of 23. And then by August, pretty much everybody was done. So August 17th, I think, is when the last little
Right.
happened. At the time, my thinking was that, yeah, there will be an impact to the industry if we're just thinking about agents, listing agents and buyers agents. There'll be a lot of confusion. Some people will drop out of the business because they won't know how to handle it. Some people will take the risk and not do what they're supposed to do, and other people will learn how to do what they need to do.
Right.
Which at that time was really just, okay, we're changing our mode, our thought, to, instead of imagining that the amount that the buyer's agent was going to make was sort of kind of set by the kind of sort of set by the seller and the listing agent and then offered up in, in the MLS. Although I have to tell you, Lloyd, that even way back almost 20 years before that, I personally used the buyer broker agreement. And right after 2008, you probably remember there were a lot of banks that were offering properties for a lot less than than the commission I expected to make.
Right.
And so I would talk to my buyers and I would say then 20 years ago, look, I work for a living and I just simply cannot survive on maybe a percent or even half or a dollar figure. So we'll go looking at these properties, and sometimes the property will be at such a level that it would be worthwhile for you to pay part of my commission. And
Right.
they were okay with that even back then.
Mhm.
So,
And I think one of the misconceptions is that the seller was paying all the commissions.
well, yeah,
Nothing could be further from the truth. I mean, it's not even close because it doesn't take a genius to figure out who's bringing the money to the table actually. And I even had a seller once that just said, and this was on a very expensive home. He told me, he's like, Lloyd, I really don't care if it's 10%. I'm like, what? I go, well, I'm not going to I'm not going to charge you that. That's not what I'm going to work for. He goes, I understand. He goes, but let's face it. The buyer is bringing the money to the table. So I don't care what it is because I'll figure out in the end what my net needs to be and I'll just negotiate based upon that. But he always felt like, and it was a shared environment of who's paying who, of course, because the party that or parties, if a lender is involved, of course. So if you've got a buyer and a lender that are bringing money to the closing table, once the seller receives those funds, then everybody gets paid. So, but who really brought the money to the table? And it really, one of the things that I've always stated is that most buyers, and I still believe this today, most buyers in general don't have the liquid cash, quite frankly, to do the down payment, do the closing costs, and do the agreements they're signing.
well,
And I really don't think a lot of people do have that money. They are going to continue to look for the seller, if you will, to pay their agent in their offer. And at the same time, I would say many sellers, they don't have the amount that they're signing up for liquid in an account. It's not until the equity in their property is freed up from transacting that they're able to pay an agent that's working on their behalf. It's I just think
right.
too many
Well,
people making these decisions think everybody just has oodles of money and can pay everybody whatever they want.
Well, exactly. I mean, you and I are kind of you're preaching to the choir for me, but the way that I used to explain it to, to my buyers and to the agents that I've worked with is, look, escrows that they've got a pot of money. And when, there's that pot that they're taking care of. And we start pouring money into the pot, and maybe the first little bit would be the earnest money gets dropped in, a few $1,000, whatever that might be. Who knows? Maybe there's some boot, or maybe there's some other cash that's coming in from some other sort. Aunt Sally, gave a couple
Right.
$1,000 to buy this $1 million house for all I know, and that money gets dropped into escrow. And then if there's a lender involved, the lender's going to drop some cash in escrow, and there's the pot. And now the escrow company, their job is to pay all the bills before anybody gets paid.
Mhm.
The cash. And so, okay, they pay for, whatever lender fees there. They pay off the loan the seller might have. They pay off the termite guy if that bill comes there, whatever other bills there are. And the last bills that get paid would be to the listing broker and to the selling broker. And then the seller gets the money. So how
Right.
was that the seller's money to begin with? It's not.
Right.
It's just the cost of doing business.
It's
Yeah.
true.
Yeah.
No, very, very true. And then there recent reports
Hmm.
actually demonstrate that from the day of settlement to a recent finding that buyer agents are actually making now more post settlement. It went from like 2.3 to almost 2.5. That the rate of what people are being paid is actually higher than what it was.
Yeah, and actually, you're probably using numbers that are, I don't know, either they're national or they're in Phoenix. I really was keeping track of the Tucson numbers, and our numbers were a little bit higher. They were probably about 2.7 or something like that. And it's floated right around there, and sometimes it's
Mhm.
gone a little bit higher. So if we want to say that there was a benefit to this whole shebang, the whole thing, here's the benefit.
Please
Uh,
tell me what it is.
the benefit in my
Are
mind,
you're going to be
yeah,
the silver lining to get today,
the
Silver
silver
Fox?
lining. Yeah, the silver lining. I'm the silver fox here. And what I'm telling you, the benefit is that buyer's agents have gotten better at explaining their value to their clients. Because they have to. They have to say, look, I do some stuff for you. It's not just you may think that it's just finding the house. Not really. Most buyers find the house on their own. Not everybody, but I have value. I represent
Right.
you. I'm your fiduciary. I take care of all of the details, the timelines, all the places where you could trip up in the contract. I make sure that you don't get into legal problems. And I explain all of this to you. I keep records of it. I organize the people who need to come and go. And by the time we're done, you're going to have a better experience than you would have if you'd gone on your own. And you probably will end up paying less money. The same on
Right.
the listing agent side. But so before this, buyer's agents didn't really have to do that kind of
Mhm.
explanation. They just, somebody said, "Oh, I want to go see this house," and they went and showed the house. They still did everything. They
Right.
just didn't communicate what they were doing, and now they're better at communicating it. So,
I think it's changed that part. Yes, I would agree with that. I do think it has, to a degree, put buyers, the consumer, at a little bit of a disadvantage,
hmm,
for a few reasons. One, many buyers early in their process, even if they're trying to consider communities and just trying to get their mind, if you will, wrapped around a marketplace, many people want to start to do that research and start to look at things on their own accord. They don't want to really, especially if they haven't, figured out an agent relationship that they want to be committed to. This now really puts a thorn in that side. And so, there were times over the years, did I always work with a buyer broker agreement? No. Matter of fact, I'm the opposite. I'm one of those agents out there that many times didn't. Very infrequently used one. Did some people veer from me and use someone else? Yeah. And I knew that was a risk, but I was always happy to audition, if you will,
yeah,
without them having to make a firm commitment to me, because you know how it is. What I express as value, what I talk about, and then witnessing it and them experiencing it in some cases could be two different things. And I think I knew I would always be able to not only explain my value, but also demonstrate it. And I feel bad that buyers are being asked to make a commitment now prior to even experiencing how that agent is going to work on their behalf as they get going. And now to be able to see a home, about the only way they're going to be able to do that, one would be to go to an open house, because they
yeah.
can certainly still do that and try and figure out community and neighborhood and try and evaluate that way. And then the other way is to engage the person who already represents the seller.
Right.
So they're getting, in that case, they're getting a completely slighted viewpoint on neighborhood, house, everything. Because what is that agent's first loyalty? They're under a fiduciary obligation to take care of that seller. And now you're walking in, you know, welcome to the Fox's Den. You
Okay.
know,
So I want to take those 2 points a little bit.
please.
The first is in terms of open houses, if the listing agent or the open house agent who is representing the seller is doing the right job, then they would be clear at the beginning that, hey, I don't represent
Mhm.
you. I
Correct.
represent the seller. I'm pretty sure that doesn't always happen, but but whatever. So that's the first piece. If they do that properly, then maybe the buyers coming in are not harmed by that. That's the one thing I could say. But I understand what you're saying about the buyers having why would you be locked into somebody you don't know? But honestly, when I worked with people as, buyer's agent, what I would do is I would say, if we had an instant connection or we knew each other already, then it wasn't really a concern. Signing that paper was
Right.
not a big deal. But if we didn't know each other, I would say, look, I'm testing you out just as much as you were testing me out. We may not be a good fit. And I'm perfectly happy to sever this document if it turns out that we're not a good fit.
Mhm.
And if you're concerned about that, then let's just make this for today or for this particular showing. And
Right.
I'm good with that. But that will mean that if we're going to go forward, once you trust me, then we'll have a longer commitment to each other. Yeah. That seemed to work.
Yeah. Yeah, and there's still the buying public out there that just goes, well, I don't really need anybody. I know exactly what I'm doing. Like, I've watched HGTV and I've seen this happen. I locked in on Chat GPT and it told me that what I need to do to represent myself.
Mm.
Um, and then
But I,
they're in a difficult world.
yeah, Mr. Buyer or Ms. Buyer, are you
Mhm.
aware of how many places you have a timeline to meet in order to get
Right.
yourself out of this and save your earnest money? Oh, yeah, like do the inspections. I said, no, that would be one
And
place.
and I've experienced that, and it's uncomfortable, even as a listing agent, when you have somebody that says, well, I'm just going to represent myself, because it makes it very difficult and challenging, provided we know we have a fiduciary responsibility, of course, to that seller. And as soon as we cross the line of giving the impression that we're working on that seller's behalf, the good old implied agency, we're in a difficult spot. And I had a property years ago, and the buyer on the other side did chose to self-represent.
Yeah.
Now, that buyer had a JD.
Mm.
As educated and as astute of an individual as he was, he missed timelines and missed out on earnest money. So
Well,
even the most savvy and educated of people
they
don't
and
always understand that this,
absolutely,
they
but
don't know the contract.
what I have advised agents who are listing a property and have a conversation with me about what do we do with an unrepresented buyer. I say you should have a deep conversation with your seller about this to begin with,
Mhm.
because if that buyer is unrepresented, the likelihood is that you're going to have double the work and you're going to
Oh,
have
yeah.
more than double the risk, because it's going to be very difficult for you not to support the buyer's interests against the interests of your seller in order to get the transaction to move
Mhm.
along properly. Whereas
Mhm.
in reality, if they ask you a question which would be harmful to your seller, like, when do I need to turn this inspection notice in? You have to think very carefully
Yeah.
about what the answer to that is. I can't tell you.
Sometimes it's more than double the work.
Yes.
I mean, depending upon how difficult and or maybe how not so educated the other side is, because it makes it more stressful for everybody, including the client you already represent, which is the seller. And then they're getting frustrated with you, and who wears all that?
And let's walk down the step a
Mm.
little bit further. All right, the transaction closes, and then afterwards the buyer discovers that they think they've been duped into buying this property because they didn't
Never
know.
happens. People get duped.
Yeah. Well,
Come
anyway,
on now.
let's say they didn't, but they think they did.
Hmm.
And if they think they did, then they're going to perhaps go forward with some kind of a lawsuit. And in the lawsuit, that puts the seller at tremendous risk, because it doesn't matter whether they did or didn't, you can still get sued.
I do think one of the most interesting parts of the settlement was something that the national associations offered up. I don't know that they needed to. I think it was a mistake because, and I'm referring to the fact that if a seller would like to provide a compensation offer of some sort to a buyer's agent to bring their buyers, that they're unable to advertise that in the smartest of places.
Yes.
They're unable to do that in the multiple listing service. However, they can do it anywhere else they want. They could put a sign in the yard that says it. They could put something on the counter stating what they're willing to offer and just be upfront about it. And I feel like the most transparent area where somebody could say, hey, this is what we're offering, take it or leave it. A buyer then comes into that situation knowing whether their agent is or isn't being compensated by the seller. And for some buyers, that makes a big difference. And I think it was a misstep, if you will. And I think it makes it open to gaming the system a bit more, if you will, in some circles.
This is a long history
Yeah,
of unintended consequences,
correct.
if you look
Hmm.
at it. I mean, if we look back at the history, I mean, why did this all really begin? There was no buyer representation back before the 70s. If we're
No,
looking at before
that's
that
true.
time, I think
Yep.
actually it was around 77 or so here in Arizona where buyer representation actually began.
Oh, it's
And
90s.
oh, well, 77 was the first increment of that. That
Okay.
was the first time when it was even discussed. So,
All right.
but before, up to that
So
point, any agent coming into a property with the buyer was really representing the seller
sub agency?
through sub-agency, but the
Yeah.
buyers didn't know that.
No.
Okay, so at that point, there was a way in the book and later in the MLS systems for the listing agent to tell sub-agents how much they were going to pay them to bring a buyer. And then when we got our buyer representation, the MLS continued that ability to see what kind of
Mm.
compensation was being offered, but it was hidden. And that was hidden from the public. So then we had Clear Cooperation that came in, that lawsuit, and that said, oh, you can't hide that. That has to be shown to the public. So we all went, oh, okay, we'll show it to the
Right.
public. And there it was in the MLS for everybody to see. This is exactly how much your buyer's agent is going to get. And then we have to take that away in the effort of transparency. It made no
Right.
sense to me.
And and now like I've had buyers because I still continue to work with the buying and selling public. I've had many a buyer, and people don't want to hear this. I've had many a buyer state that if we don't know what's being offered in advance, I do not want to consider the property.
Mm,
And there's a lot of agents and brokers out there, go, oh, that's not true. Well, tell my client that.
yeah.
I had one just say, I am not willing to play effing games. Direct quote from her. And she's like, I just don't have time to mess around like that. I want to know up front whether I'm going to have some assistance here or not, or I'm just wasting my time and I don't want to waste my time. And sadly, we get other, if you will, I guess we're talking heads now too. Other talking heads out there that state that if you represent the seller and somebody asks you whether your seller is willing to compensate what that amount is, and you give out an amount, you may have broken fiduciary, which I think is absolute silliness if a seller has already provided you the directive that if asked, here's what we're willing to pay.
To me, this is no different than a seller saying, I'm willing to give some concessions. Buyers, I want to open the door
Mhm.
to you. You need some help with your financing. You need to some help with clearing closing costs. You need a flooring allowance. I'm going to give those to you and I'm going to advertise that. So why can't you do the same for the other? To me, it
Yeah,
makes
it's truly a shame. I think it does put, in that regard, it puts a lot more of the cards clearly in the seller's hands, which I think part of the settlement was to try and do that. So in this regard, I guess so. But you've disadvantaged a lot of the buying audience out there. And last time I checked, they're part of the public as well. So if we're looking to do no harm, if you will, I do think to a degree we certainly hurt buyers far more than we did sellers.
Oh,
It's not
I
it's
would
not even
agree.
close. Yeah.
And if we were actually being completely transparent, and there will be people who freak out when I say this, why wouldn't we also advertise how much the seller is paying their listing agent?
Right.
I mean, if we're going to be completely transparent about things, then everybody's commission should be on the table. But on that, if we're going to go that far, then I think maybe we should also be transparent about how much the lawyers are getting paid.
Oh gosh. Yeah. Who's really the beneficiary of all this or
Yeah.
beneficiaries? Yeah, pretty sad. And to go back to the fiduciary part of whether you disclose or don't disclose based upon what your seller has told you to do to the buying agent on the other side who's inquired about a level of compensation or if any is being provided, because not everybody has to provide it either. Nobody's had to here. I think in our local MLS, you had to offer $1.
Yeah.
And
So
there were listings in there for $1. I mean, there was no standard set rate anywhere, not in the entire country.
that's correct. I was on the MLS board for Tucson when we had that discussion about, can you offer $1? Absolutely.
Yep.
Offer $1.
Yeah, which is pretty close to nothing. Last time I was at the gas pump, $1 ain't going to get you much. Just, just observation.
Yeah.
But if we're going to take this fiduciary thing one step further, then why are we even putting list prices on homes?
Hmm.
I mean, what if, because we're assuming that as agents that the general, the average agent out there is astute enough to properly value a home. And then you throw out that price based upon that evaluation, only to find out, which we have seen, property sells for $20,000, $50,000, $100, a few $100,000 more. What would it have been if it were just wide open, right?
No, absolutely. I understand that. So, yeah. And what is price after all? What is value? What determines that?
Well, if you're a cash buyer, it's what the market says. It's what that buyer is willing to pay for it. But not so if you're getting a loan.
Well,
because then it's not just purely about what the buyer is willing to pay for it, but it's also in another eye of the beholder, if you will, the appraiser. Because that lender is going to say, you might be a little overserved, sir, if you think you're going to pay that for this property, because our paperwork shows here that you're grossly overpaying. So if a property doesn't appraise for what's the contracted price, there are certain options related to that a buyer can take and a seller can take. But unless you're cash, the market doesn't necessarily determine the price.
Absolutely. This does bring up another point, because the big argument was that for the Sitzer Burnett lawsuit was that somehow or another the sellers were being gypped out of that money. And I just think, I'm sorry, but if I look at all the appraisals that have been done since we've been in real estate, the appraisals have figured in that cost of doing business as a part of the transaction.
Right.
So that, call it the 3%, call it the 4%, call it whatever percent you want, but that piece was baked in the cake. And so when your seller's property gets appraised, the appraisal assumes that that piece is already in there. And if it starts getting taken out, then the appraiser's job really would be to say, with each one of these comps that I'm using, how much was everybody paid? Because I've got to take that out of the price of the appraisal I'm doing if our seller's not offering that.
Yeah, it's interesting because I'm gonna ask you why you use cake as an example on this, because I always talk about the chimichangas. And Tucson's home of the chimichangas, John. I mean, that's where they started.
Yeah, but
That's where it was
nobody's
created.
baked in the chimichanga. Come on now.
Well, you fry it into the chimichanga. But you're right. I mean, everybody knew exactly where the money was coming from. Everybody knew where people were getting paid. Every settlement statement had clearly who was being compensated and at what level, et cetera. It's as transparent as you can possibly get. It is far more transparent than what you see in other, if you will, highly compensated professions. For example, in the investment world, financial planners, advisors, do you get a statement of where they're getting paid on the front end and the back end from your money being invested?
Hmm.
I'm going to say no. You don't get that transparency. You had clear transparency here as to exactly what the person working on your behalf was being paid, period, and by whom.
Well, I don't know if we've beaten this one to death yet. Is there something else? Because, basically we're arguing the same point back and forth.
Yeah, I know. I know. What are you drinking today? Are you having tea or what are you doing?
Oh, it'd be
I've been
nice.
sitting here sipping my lifeboat coffee.
Okay,
From
well, at some point or another,
Skipper
I will get
John
some of
over
these
in
guys.
Sunny Slope. He roasts this stuff up for us here. He calls it the tactical blend, but it's fantastic.
Mm, that
And it's
reminds
one of
me.
those rare rainy days that we've had here in the desert. So
Oh my God, the rain here was fabulous last night. I had a torrent. I mean, literally, it looked like the sky had opened up and, you know, an elephant rain is what we used to call it in India. Yeah.
I don't want to get into what that means.
You could,
Anyway, hey, so great to see you again and look forward to our next chat. And hey, everybody out there, just want to say thank you for joining us. Please like and subscribe. We'll hope to see you again soon. Take care.